I have heard from so many young women that when I talk about the fact that it's a struggle and that it's not always perfect and you don't have to be perfect as a mom or as a professional, and your kids are going to be okay. I had so much guilt as a young professional that somehow my kids were going to be really damaged because I had chosen to pursue a career. And when I took this job, my daughter said, I get why everybody's excited, but my mom has always had leadership roles as long as I've known my mom. This is what women do. This is what moms do. This is normal. And they balance and they juggle and they make mistakes and they lead. As I say that to young women, they're like, you can see them go, okay, so I'm not the worst person in the world. And just giving people a space to say, it's okay. We'll get through this. And everybody's sort of feeling it. You're not alone.
Hello, and welcome to IngenioUs, the podcast where in this current season, we are exploring the lessons and the insights from some of higher education's most transformative women leaders. I'm Melissa Morris-Olson, your host, and today we're diving deep into one of the most compelling turnaround stories in academia. You just heard from Dr. Danielle Wilken, president of the University of Bridgeport, speaking about the reality of leading while being authentically human. But that vulnerability and honesty, it's exactly what has made her one of the most effective transformational leaders I've encountered. In today's conversation, we're going behind the scenes of an extraordinary journey, from navigating a complex institutional partnership that required building the airplane while flying it, to creating a culture where faculty pitch ideas in Shark Tank-style sessions, to achieving measurable growth in enrollment and financial stability. Danielle spent 20 years at one institution before stepping into her first presidency, and her story challenges everything we think we know about career advancement in higher education. We'll explore how daily phone calls with her father shaped her leadership philosophy, why she believes growth only comes through challenge, and how she's using Universal Design for Learning, otherwise known as UDL, to transform not just how students learn, but how they see themselves. This is a conversation about authentic leadership, the power of staying committed to mission over title, and what it really takes to turn around an institution while maintaining your humanity. Whether you're an aspiring leader, a seasoned administrator, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of education, Danielle's insights will challenge and inspire you. Let's dive in. Danielle, I am so excited to welcome you today to the IngenioUs community.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So as you know, as I was just mentioning before we went on the air, I have followed your journey for a very long time. I know you've done such excellent work at Goodwin before making the transition to your first presidency at the University of Bridgeport. Our listeners are always so interested in hearing the personal side of somebody's leadership journey. So can you tell us a little bit more about your journey? And in particular, what are some of the forces, the influences that have shaped your leadership journey and ultimately led you to the presidency that you're in?
Sure. I've always had strong leadership skills, even when I think back to, elementary school and those moments. Wasn't always the smartest in the class, but always hardworking and had strong leadership skills. Even when I didn't feel like I had them, they were recognized by other people. I would say one of the greatest influences was my dad. My dad was always a big part of my life, always very involved. From the day I moved out of my parents' house, my dad always made time for me on my ride to work. So, as far as I can remember, my dad would, when I was driving to work, my dad would take my calls in the morning and he would block his calendar in a way so that there was time to talk about family, to talk about life, to talk about politics, and often to talk about work. My dad often had a leadership role and he would love to poke at my thinking. And unfortunately, my dad passed a little over a year ago. And I remember when my dad was sick, and people would say to me, "How is your dad doing?" And my answer was always, "Well, he's still well enough to tell me how to run a university and how to run my life." And so he was always a great place to noodle new ideas, whether it was work or professional. And so I think he had a very important role in my life. And I will tell you, there's more often than not, something important will happen at work or something important will happen at home. And I'll think, I got to call dad. And there's always a little bit of a catch there when I realize I can't download that to him. And as you said earlier, I spent a lot of time at Goodwin University, almost 20 years of my life professionally. And that professional experience really created, because of the journey that Goodwin was on and the unique path that Goodwin was on, I think I developed a unique set of skills and mindset that prepared me for taking on the presidency at University of Bridgeport.
Well, what a gift your dad gave you.
It was.
What a legacy and what a loss. I can
Yes,
feel as you're talking about it. When we lose people close to us, we there that loss we carry with us for the rest of our lives. So I
we do. But it's come full circle, actually. When my dad was dying, there was a hard day that I had left him. And on the car ride home, I called the vice president for advancement. I said, "Remind me how much money it takes to endow a scholarship." And so we ultimately ended up creating a scholarship in my dad's honor while he was still alive. And he got to help develop the criteria. And so his legacy gets to live on through all those important pieces, get to live on every day. And we actually got to give out the scholarship for the first time this year and meet the student who was awarded it. And so he's still here. And I wasn't actually planning on telling that part of the story, but yes, I do feel him every day. And I do get to incorporate him into work life even now.
Yeah, well, and what a gift you then gave him that he
Yes.
knew that this was going to happen before he passed. So you mentioned your 2 decades at Goodwin University and how consequential that was for you. Can you go a little bit deeper in talking about what specifically your experience at Goodwin taught you? Are there a few takeaways that stand?
Sure. You can't spend 20 years anywhere without having a couple of takeaways. Goodwin is interesting. Professionally, it's almost a childhood home. I grew up there professionally. I spent 20 years there, which means I had a lot of successes, but it's also the place where I've made a lot of mistakes and learned some hard knocks. And so, because of the relationship between Goodwin and UB, I still spend some time up there occasionally. And I often say I feel like a kid who came home on a college weekend when I go back to Goodwin, because it's such a strong roots for me. I learned or expanded most of my technical skills in the higher education space, whether that's pedagogy, accreditation, program development, financial literacy, the mechanics of running an institution. What does it mean to lead? So many projects, so many pieces that I learned there. And so that was critical. A lot that I learned about leadership, I learned through observations. And as I said, my own mistakes and successes. I would say key takeaways were learn to own when you've made a mistake and say you're sorry, which I don't think it's a leadership skill a lot of people ever learn. And so that was modeled for me. It was something I had to practice there as well. So that was a very important one. Your growth is in the challenge. It's very easy to do stuff when things are going well or people are telling you that you're doing great. But the real growth is when things are hard, when things are not going your way, when you have to build consensus, when you have to build coalition, when you have to work through it. It's sort of like working out that it has to feel a little bit of pain for you to get better. No one has all the answers. I think whatever seat we're sitting in, we're pretty sure we're smarter than everybody else in the conversation. As a faculty member, you're like, oh, administration doesn't get it. As an administrator, you're like, nobody's listening to what I'm saying. And in order for an institution to be at its best, you need that blended voice and that opportunity to work together in order for everyone to succeed. A story that I tell often, because it was such a pivotal learning experience. When I became vice president for academic affairs, I was rejiggering things. And I was working really closely with my deans, and I thought I was doing faculty a favor. I thought I was eliminating a lot of noise and doing all this work, and they didn't have to think about it. And I frustrated faculty. I frustrated faculty because they felt like a lot of things were happening. They weren't even upset about what was happening. They just felt like a lot of things were happening and that they weren't having an opportunity to weigh in. And so Faculty Senate wrote me a letter and basically said, "Hey, we're feeling frustrated. We'd like to assign 2 faculty members to your academic leadership team so that we can have a voice at the table." And I went and I met with Faculty Senate, and I say this with love, it was me and 80 people in a room. And I said, "That's not going to happen. That's my space with my leadership team. But let's talk about what's frustrating you and how we can resolve this issue." And ultimately, I met with Faculty Senate leadership twice a month. It was every other week. And then it became once a month. And then it became once a semester as we worked through some of those challenges and there was less sand in the gears. And in the end, a year later, we were so much better for it. We would often have accreditors come in and Faculty Senate would say how great the administration was about listening and collaborating. And we would say how great Faculty Senate was about listening and collaborating. And a lot of people said, "Okay, who's paying off who?" Because nobody ever says that in an institution. It's usually
Right.
contentious. So it was this great opportunity to recognize that I had missed a voice. I was missing pieces as I was making decisions. And it was also an opportunity for me to say, I was sorry for creating the conditions in which Faculty Senate felt that they needed to write me a letter and get my attention. And so that's a huge piece that I've carried forward. And providing, as a leader, it's important to provide vision and to provide a common perspective and enforce that common perspective. I did a lot of work around universal design for learning, which is a pedagogical approach to support students. And faculty still talk about that many years later. And they said one of the most important pieces of that, even if we agree or don't agree that UDL was the right choice, it gave us a common language and a common voice by which to discuss
Sure.
curriculum challenges, supporting students. And they said that in itself took sand out of the gears.
Those are great stories. And I have some follow-up questions that are prompted by the stories. First, why is it important or why did you find it important to keep some separation between your leadership team space and the faculty? Because I can imagine some presidents might say, "Oh, sure, sure, you can come and join the cabinet. The more, the merrier." So, why did you feel strongly about that?
Because I think each group has its own needs and perspectives, and each group needs its space. So I imagine if I went to Faculty Senate and said, we're just going to insert ourselves into your Faculty Senate meetings, you'd have a similar sort of. I wanted to make sure that my deans had an opportunity to have a space where they could talk about things that were frustrating to them and not feel like they needed to say it perfectly and
Yeah.
just to have that space to nuance things. And by having that Faculty Senate meeting, originally it was once every 2 weeks, I became a conduit by which I could take information from Faculty Senate, from the academic leadership, and from the cabinet, and sort of like the center of a wheel with all the spokes, and I could push information in and out in a constructive way that gave everybody an opportunity to work through things. And long term, those Faculty Senate meetings became a place for me to try things out and to have conversations before I was ready to go live with them. And I would also say it's important. One of the things, because we separated them, it became much more clear to us as an institution what was the purview of faculty and what was the purview of the administration. And so I think it's important to keep them separate because they actually do have very different roles. And so um, I remember one time administratively, we were talking about, this way of dealing with grades. And I actually said, hard stop. This is truly the function of faculty. If ever there was a space that the faculty own and vice versa, there was something else going on. And I said, well, that's actually an administrative function versus a faculty function. And having those lines of clarity really helped all of us. They became really rich conversations about clearly belongs to this group. Conversations started to form around who should be the influencer and who should be the responder. So, should this start with Faculty Senate to put a proposal out for administration to respond to, or should administration be putting a proposal out for Faculty Senate to respond to? And so, or the cabinet. And so it helped remove a lot of noise and sand from the gears as we got better and better at developing those muscles.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can see how that kind of clarity and clarity in terms of vision but in conversation and in listening, that combination is just it's a wonderful model, and I can see how that has worked for you. The other observation I wanted to make, I think it's really unusual in this day and age for you to have been at one place 20 years at Goodwin before assuming the presidency. And obviously, that's a unique situation in terms of how that all evolved, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute. It's the opposite of what we see so often with people doing 5 years here, 5 years there, 5 years here, on their way to, whatever their ultimate aspiration is. I think it's a wonderful thing. As somebody who has spent a lot of time myself in an institution, as opposed to, moving around a lot, what does that reflect about you and what's important to you?
I think it reflects my commitment to the mission.
Okay.
I think a lot of times when people are career hopping, they're doing it because they're looking for the next big paycheck or they're looking for the next big title. You can ask anybody at their institution and they'll tell you that my goal was never to be a president because I've been very transparent about that. I was on track to be the chief academic officer. That was important to me. That was a space that I loved, but it was always about the mission first.
Yeah.
And I actually turned down promotions over the years because it wasn't the right time in my life. And so it was not about chasing a title or chasing a paycheck. It was about the students that we serve at both institutions. And I think, going back to that scholarship, we invested a lot of the family's money into that scholarship for my dad. And there was a really pivotal moment as we were getting ready to write the first check. I had a moment of, I have to be serious about staying here because I was always serious, but it was an odd moment to reflect on it again,
Sure.
because it wasn't just my commitment at that point. It was now my family's commitment, in a different way. And so, I think when I think part of the challenges we have in higher education is you don't have longevity of senior teams, which means you don't have, it's not about surviving the next 5 years. It's not about the next five. It's really about how do you get through the next 20 to 25, 30 years. And while you may have to be at an institution as a senior leader for an extended period of time to be a part of those strategic plans that build one onto the next, and implementing those initiatives and seeing them long term. UDL is an example. That was a doctoral dissertation that I worked on. My daughter was in second grade
Ah,
when I graduated with my dissertation and we got our first grant at Goodwin. She's a junior going into her senior year in the fall. That's a long time to be working on one initiative across two institutions. You
yeah.
don't see that sort of longevity. And so it's really a reflection on how much I value the students, the institution, and the mission, um, that I think I'm here to serve.
Yeah, well, they're lucky to have you because
Thank you.
that is a rare, unfortunately, that's more rare today than I wish it were. So let's switch gears, talk about the University of Bridgeport, the turnaround. The story in recent years, as you know so well, is one of transformation and resilience. So take us back to when you first went into the role of president in 2021. If we could be inside your brain, what were you thinking at that point? What did you see in terms of the college, the culture, the challenges you were facing, and how did you begin to chart a path forward?
Sure. So let me actually take a step back and talk about what the relationship is, because
Sure.
a lot of people may not be familiar with it. In 2020, University of Bridgeport was looking for a partner to move forward with. There were multiple iterations of what that looked like, but ultimately, University of Bridgeport entered into a significant partnership with Goodwin University, and it looks very different from most, in a lot of in higher education, as you see these sort of partnerships unfold, there's the bigger school investing financially in a struggling institution, and a lot of times it absorption, a takeover. The model that Goodwin used was University of Bridgeport and Goodwin entered into a partnership. While there is a corporate, both are nonprofits, but the easiest way to explain it, from a corporate structure, there is a formal relationship. They look like sister institutions in practice. We actually don't call it a merger. We don't call it an acquisition. We refer to 2021 as the transaction because it's not well defined and there's no other models that look like it. I was at Goodwin during the year or it was about 9 months of all that work that had to be done with 13 programmatic regulators or accreditors. NETCHI as our institutional accreditors for both schools, the Connecticut Office of Higher Education, the U.S. Department of Education. It was a very complex transaction. And I was at Goodwin. I had no expectations of going to University of Bridgeport, and I was working very closely with the provost. I was provost at Goodwin. I was working very closely with the provost at UB, and we were figuring out a lot of the accreditation pieces and a lot of the academic pieces. And so it wasn't until much closer to May of 2021 where we realized what the model was truly going to be and that there were going to be two separate presidents, two separate provosts, two separate CFOs, some joint cabinet members, two separate boards, that everybody at the Goodwin side went, oh, we have to really think about who's going to lead this institution. And I was asked to take on that adventure. And it was a tough moment in UB history. We were coming off of COVID. We were coming off of a very short-term president there was an interim, but there was a president who was there for a very, very short period of time. A lot of institutional history. We're coming up on our 100-year anniversary. Some of that is incredible, amazing history, and some of it has been challenge, as you would expect with any institution that's 100 years old. And I think the most important thing I did as the new president was to begin to set a new vision and to work on culture and communication. I was lucky in the fact that people at UB knew me at least a little bit when we were going through the transaction on the Goodwin side. Myself and the president at Goodwin hosted town halls for UB every 2 weeks. They were 2 hours and they were very intense, as it was a very challenging time.
Can you give us an example? Type of
Sure.
questions that you heard from faculty or others?
Sure. So the president at Goodwin is Mark Steinberg, and he and I started hosting town halls for Goodwin prior to UB. So we started hosting these Zoom town halls during COVID. It was a way of us keeping everybody connected at Goodwin during COVID. And then we rolled over into this. And those were really, there was a lighthearted component to them. They were everybody we knew, and it was a very familial kind of conversation. And it was a way that we all stayed connected. And I think we got a splash of cold water on us when we hosted our first UB one, because it was an institution that was really going through a difficult time and had a lot of challenges, and people were scared. Like there was not a lot of clarity on what was next. It was questions relative to what would the structure be, questions relative to the fact that faculty tenure was going away, questions we didn't know if we were keeping our athletic program or not at that time. And it was hard because we were trying to be honest and transparent about where we were going, but there were still a lot of unanswered questions on our end. And there would be things that we would say, this is definitely going to happen on this day, because that was the best information that we had at the time and what we believed, and we were being honest about it. And then 6 weeks go by and something would change. It was so hard and it was honest, but it was not easy because we were getting new information from the U.S. Department of Education. I just did my decennial visit with NETCHI. We all shared the same chuckle about we had submitted 3 substantive changes for the transaction, which were 3 different models that we literally handed to our accreditor, said, this is what we're going to do. Okay, never mind. We learned this and now we have to take that back. Here's our next version.
It sounds like you were building the airplane while you were flying it. Right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And every once in a while, a piece would fly off and you'd have to rebuild a new piece.
So you must be, I'm thinking again about you and your leadership style, something like that requires a person to dig deep in their own ability to adapt and be flexible. Is that something that comes natural to you, or are those things you had to really hone in the situation?
I think they do come naturally to me. I will say 4 years later, I'm a little bit more tired. I think we all thought 2020, we'll just get through COVID and everything will go back to being normal. And I don't think there's ever been a normal since 2020. But yeah, there are days where you think, oh, I'm done. I've had enough of this adventure. But then something will happen and it'll refeed you, it'll
Sure.
renourish you, and you'll go back at it and you keep going. But to go back to your question about, rebuilding or building that trust, all these conversations that had taken place by Zoom, for close to a year. My announcement happened over a Zoom call for both institutions. So May 2021 happens, and I'm now sitting in the office that I'm sitting in. And by July of that summer, I hosted an in-person town hall where I set expectations for our community as we move forward. I talked about growth initiatives, and we followed it up with a block party style celebration that allowed me to connect with people in person. And that set the stage moving forward. I have quarterly meetings that are affectionately known as UB Shark Tank, which means any faculty or staff member can pitch an idea to the cabinet that increases revenue, decreases costs, or improves the student experience. Um, I talked about that comment earlier of the senior team alone is not going to solve the challenges of higher education or the institution alone, and what we need to do to partner, and how to open up lines of communication. And I know 4 years later that some of the conversations that we had starting that town hall and have taken root, because people will catch me in the hallway or catch me in an event and say to me, I know the administration may not be able to see this from your perspective, but here's a data point, here's an experience, here's something I think you should know because it influences what's happening at the university that you may not be able to see given your vantage point, as senior team flying at 30,000 feet and versus somebody who's boots on the ground. And I also hear fairly commonly, the mission is really important. The work that we do is really important. But at the end of the day, we have to balance our budget. We have to be responsible with our revenue. We have to be mindful of our expenses. And so I don't know if you know this, but I want to share this insight with you, where I think there's an opportunity to fix something or to change something. And so institutionally, people really do understand, I think, the financial structure of the institution more than many other institutions, because we have a lot of honest, transparent conversations about what's working and what's not working so that we can all row in the same direction. And that the decisions the senior team makes are, first of all, well-informed, but second of all, people understand why we're making them. And so they're much more supportive of them, even if they
Yeah.
don't always agree with them or like them.
Those are all really wonderful signs of transformation and cultural change and growth. And as you know, it's not a one and done. It's something that you have to work at day in and day out for a long, long time. So as you look at the University of Bridgeport today compared to 4 years ago?
Yep.
How is the institution different in terms of the operational side of things? So, for example, I believe you've overseen enrollment growth, new academic athletic programs, student-focused improvements.
These are difficult days for higher education. Even before the pandemic, higher education was in a free fall. Colleges are closing and merging at an ever increasing rate. Leaders are facing challenges from every direction. No wonder so many experts are calling for a new kind of leadership. The Bay Path University Doctorate in Educational Leadership, with a concentration in higher ed leadership and organizational studies, affectionately known as HELOS, was created for just this time and purpose. We asked seasoned leaders for their input, and then we designed a program in response. The EDD program prepares students to become self-aware, effective, adaptive leaders who know exactly how to leverage their institution's strengths and potential to create lasting change and enduring success. All coursework is online, and students receive an abundance of personalized support from peers and from our expert faculty. And through the dissertation and practice, our students learn how to plan and implement a change process to address a real organizational problem. If you want to become a catalyst for change in higher education and have an impact, take the next step by visiting our website at baypath.edu/EDD.
If you had to describe the health of the institution compared to 4 years ago, How would you describe it, and what indicators would you point to? And what's made the biggest difference?
I can't say this enough, but I would say open communication. I'm reticent as I say it because there's always somebody who thinks you haven't communicated enough. But I do think that we work really hard at open communication, whether that's hosting town halls every single semester that includes an Ask the President section that people can submit questions anonymously in advance. Also, where we present our agenda for what's going on. As I said, the opportunity for people to pitch ideas. We've actually implemented a number of those ideas. That wasn't just empty space.
What's an example of one of
Yeah.
those ideas that you're particularly excited about?
So we've created 2 student-led companies on campus that created internship opportunities for our students that allowed them to go from ideation to implementation to running a business that our students have leveraged to get really strong positions after graduation. That includes Purple Night Coffee Company, and UB Consulting, where our students work on consulting projects. From a faculty perspective, the dental hygiene faculty came to us and said, I did a pitch on creating an expanded function dental assisting program that we've since implemented. We're looking at creating a book publishing company that allows our students to practice those skills. None of those have been specifically massive revenue generating opportunities. Well, that's not true. The dental hygiene one does, but the student-led ones have really allowed our students, particularly our international students who don't always have the opportunity to pursue internships because of visa issues. Then some of our athletic programs, our athletic new sports came through that. We've since shifted and we have a vice president for athletics, recreation, and student experience on the cabinet. So there's much more direct conversations, but some of the initial projects out of athletics came through there. And so that has allowed us to see things that we might not be able to see as a senior team. You can't see everything everywhere. And so that's allowed us to do that. Adding athletics has allowed us to grow our undergraduate enrollment. We've had very transparent conversations with the coaches on the financial models for that. And we also had very honest conversations with the entire UB community. A normal initial faculty reaction was like, well, why are you investing in athletics? We're an academic institution. And to be able to say, if we do this, this is what we expect from, undergraduate enrollment, which allows us to have this revenue. And so to have those sort of conversations, everybody's rowing in the same direction.
Yeah. So what athletic programs did you add?
We've added men and women's track. We have added men and women's swim and diving. We've added men and women's wrestling. We are adding men and women's rowing, and we happen or crew, and we have a fantastic benefactor for that. And so those are some of the ones that we've added. And men's lacrosse. We also have added men's lacrosse since I started here.
Those are great. Crew is a wonderful sport for bringing in students who are not necessarily athletes. One of the wonderful things, I'm sure about crew is you can start it at the college level, and it's a very accessible kind of sport. So,
although it's gotten much more, yes, I would agree.
It is more competitive than it used to be, but
yes. And a lot of schools are cutting it because it's expensive, but having a benefactor makes a huge difference.
Yes.
And if I look out my window, I overlook the Long Island Sound, which is pretty amazing.
Yes.
And ironically, my son was a rower and my daughter's a coxswain. So I've lived the crew world for a long time.
That one's personal for you. So
it's very personal for me. Yes, I have to get up early tomorrow morning because she's got crew again tomorrow. So yes.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of things. It sounds like the turnaround strategy has been multi-pronged. Is there one or two operational things that really stand out in terms of having made a difference?
I would say adding the athletics has definitely helped grow the undergraduate space. I would say as an institution, understanding who we are and what we're focused on has allowed us to shed things that were distractors and created financial losses, and it allowed us to double down on areas of growth. And I would say that as an example, UB and Goodwin participated for both institutions, their first bond raise last year. And so both schools got money out of a bond, and very proud of that because we had the first socially designated bond in the state of Connecticut, which is a reflection of the work we do and the mission. And when you look at where we invested in new engineering labs, new health sciences labs, and working on our athletic facilities. And so those are spaces, where you could say, okay, here's what you're going to invest in, and here's going to be the return on that investment.
Sure. And those make sense, actually, given the history mission of your institution where you've been strong academically. So, congratulations on that bond.
Thank you.
No easy thing. So, let's shift gears and talk a little bit more about your leadership style, your philosophy. How would I'm going to say this a little differently. If I were to follow you around the campus, what would I see in terms of how you lead? What would I experience in terms of your leadership?
A close advisor on my cabinet once told me I am miserable when I'm at my computer. And she said to me, when you get tired of being there, walk around, you'll engage with people and everybody will benefit. And I think that's true. I think one of my greatest frustrations and one of my greatest strengths is I don't get to spend a lot of time sitting in my office doing work. Actually clearing emails, answering things. I spend a lot of time meeting with donors, meeting with community partners, meeting with faculty and staff, meeting with students. And so um, I may not be easy to find, as in you can't find me in my office, but I'm always around and I'm always engaging in something. And so I think that's a big piece of it. I try to eat lunch in the student dining hall a couple of times a week. That allows me to have sort of, I've never called it that, but I've talked about it and everybody sort of recognizes it for what it is. It's sort of an open office hours where, sometimes I'm going over with senior leaders and we're working through, it's a working lunch, but it gives me a chance to say hi to students. It gives me a chance to say hi to faculty and staff. People do catch me in those moments to say, hey, good news. We won a tournament. We won something. Our students are, something is positive is happening. And so that allows me to do that. I try to celebrate the moments where we've had a win. It's, the women on our women's soccer team, the last 2 years, they won their championship. And so I host a lunch for them. And I did that this year for our men's basketball team. And the women's soccer team, and they'll say to me, so you're hosting a lunch this year? And I'll say, I don't know, you're winning a championship this year. And so, you have those playful moments. I've done that for our students who are involved in a NASA balloon launch, students who've won the commodities exchange competitions internationally. And so try to be present where I can. It's impossible to be everywhere all the time, particularly as a mom and still having kids at home. I do try to be around and present because that's where that's where the magic is. And that's also where you get to see where should we be going next. It's those moments that you think, are going to not be as critical that all of a sudden somebody will say something to you and like, oh my gosh, if we double down on this, if we pivot this way, we could have this much more impact.
Yeah, boy, you're reminding me of a book I read a long, long time ago by a Hollywood producer about curiosity. And he talked about the power of curiosity conversations, the fact that he got his best ideas from movies when he was out and about and talking to people and listening. And not necessarily people in Hollywood, but people who were just in his path from day to day. And I think that is part of your magic too. It sounds like being out there. It also feeds your energy.
It does.
You're saying, which helps in a job like that. What's your superpower? Do you have a leadership superpower?
I think my ability to listen and my ability to take ideas that may not look like they connect and create something out of it. I've actually had to learn as a professional to sort of use my step-by-step ideas out loud, because otherwise it looks like I haven't been listening to the conversation at all. Because, some people they'll be talking about apples and I'll be like, we can create a farm, and not even a farm. That's actually more connected. Like, I'll say something like, we can, create a manufacturing plant. They're like, we were talking about apples. Did you not hear anything I said? And what they can't see is like, well, somebody said something about apples, which reminds me of this story, which then brought me over here, which then got me over here. And so I've actually had to learn to say out loud, I know it looks like there's no connection between the two ideas that we're talking about, but here's how I got from here to here, so that people know that I'm listening to them and I'm respecting what it is they have to say.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I don't think any of us ever do enough of that. I think particularly if you are a visionary, if you are an entrepreneur and you can quickly in your own head make those leaps, if you're going to bring people along with you, you have to learn how to do that. So that's a very insightful observation. Now, you've talked about UDL couple of times, universal design for learning, which, as you've mentioned, is really your an area of expertise going back to your dissertation and maybe before that.
I absolutely believe with everything in my body that higher education provides people with a pathway forward. And it is the access card to moving forward. We created a scholarship at UB for students in the city of Bridgeport to go to school at University of Bridgeport called Bridgeport's Brightest. And I truly believe when I talk about that scholarship, you're changing the student's life, you're changing their health outcomes, you're changing their socioeconomic outcomes, you're changing their family's outcomes, and you're changing their community. When I was at Goodwin, I would attend conferences for how do you support veteran learners? How do you support first-gen learners? How do you support minority learners? How do you support individuals with learning differences? And sometimes those different models were in conflict with each other. And it meant that somebody was being othered in some way or another. And I would look at my students at Goodwin, and this is consistent with my experience at University of Bridgeport, and you would have a student who would have 5 of those labels. And I would say, well, how am I supposed to do this? And what I loved about universal design for learning is it steps away from labeling and othering in some way or another. And it really talks about how do you leverage students' assets that they bring to the table. And, anytime you talk about a pedagogy that is not the normal experience, the normal that we had as an American model of education is really based on the Industrial Revolution and widgets, but it removed the labels. And more importantly, it forces the student to be the most important person in the room in their own learning. It requires them to be an engaged learner. It requires them to not be a passive learner and sit in a classroom and say, okay, the faculty member is just going to pour this information over me in the form of a lecture, and I will sit here and wait for it to absorb into me somehow. It really requires students to be engaged and learning, and share that responsibility with the faculty member. I cannot think of a better way to provide access to education and to elevate a student's life experience than making them an empowered learner.
So, what about mentorship? Have you had mentors? If so, what was the impact and any lessons or wisdom that have stayed with you?
Yeah. So when I started at Goodwin, Goodwin was going through a lot of growth rapidly, and it was a very small institution when I started. So Judy Zimmerman was the vice president for academic affairs, Ann Clark was the provost, and Janet Jefford was the vice president for institutional effectiveness. And I jokingly say I was raised by the 3 sisters, and I received mentorship and guidance and feedback from them pretty routinely for decades. And so it allowed me to experience different operations under each of them. It allowed me to do special projects under all of them and to see how 3 women led very differently and how they engaged with the cabinet. Um, and it absolutely gave me the opportunity to pick and choose what was working for me and to see things modeled and to get feedback on that. It was, I can't imagine being the professional that I am today without that experience.
What advice would you give to a woman who's maybe just starting out, but she sees you and she wants to be you? She wants to someday maybe be in the president's seat. What should she know? What should they know as they aspire to step into positions of greater influence? What do you wish you had known?
I think there is the idea as women, and I think this, probably applies to men, but to differing degrees. We can have it all. We can, be moms and we can have this career. And I think that is true. You can't have it all in every moment. I think it's important to know that it's every time I talk to a group of women on this issue, especially younger women who are struggling and like, I can't figure out how to do this. I'm like, because you can't. Like you really, there's going to be moments where work is going to need you more, or your family's going to need you more. I know for myself, my family is often the barometer of whether or not I'm going to have a good day. If my kids are in a good spot, I can probably figure out the rest. And there will be times where I need to say to my kids, this is what's happening at work. this is where I need to be. But the flip side of that is I have always been there for my kids in the critical moments. One of my kids needed me earlier this year, literally got like the phone call, and I had a whole afternoon of important meetings left, canceled every one of them because that's where I needed to be. And because I've built that bank of goodwill with my kids, I can, balance it out. But I think that's one of the big pieces is just learning the juggle, because the juggle is real. And in any given moment, the feeling of something's not getting done is probably real, and figure out, is it life or death? And it's okay to be your authentic self in that way.
Yeah. So what keeps you grounded? Obviously, family is important, but um, what keeps you grounded and motivated? And where do you go to fill up your own tank?
I'm filling up my own tank, as you said, personally is at home. Bought a house last year that is nestled in nature, flower garden, vegetable garden, really large old trees that sort of tower over you, running water, 2 giant dogs, 20 chickens. So it's pretty grounded in the nature, and it gets me away from all the electronics and the overwhelming information that comes through my electronics, whether it's my phone or my computer every day. And as you said, the kids. Professionally, it's the wins that help me stay on track. Whether we get the donation or it's, there's a new initiative that's giving me jazz and filling up my tank professionally. The 4-year anniversary, I have gotten messages literally from all over the world, from Saudi Arabia, from Asia, from faculty, staff, students that just said, we see what you're doing, we see all the changes, and we're appreciative. And that was amazing. And really a lot for the team to be proud of. And I think also as educators, we forget that we're planting seeds that we can't always see.
Right.
And somebody posted on the graduation post that I did, when you spoke a few years ago, the words that you said have influenced how I live my life and have made a big impact. And you can't know that until somebody says it back to you. And she said it to me on a morning where I felt like my cup was really empty. And, I saw that post on LinkedIn. I'm like, okay, settling down. Let's get the rest of this day done. Let's crush these goals and let's just move forward. And so the wins, you need to celebrate the wins, because there is, as you know, higher education is facing some tough times and it feels overwhelming at times. And you've just got to grab onto those wins and fill up your cup.
Yeah, yeah. So for sure, you strike me as somebody with a lot of energy, and you also have a good sense of humor, I think, which probably also helps, maybe some.
I would say that's true.
So
There was one time I had a problem at work, and HR and I were trying to solve it, and they thought we were having like the best time. And we were in the thick of a really bad problem, but we were just approaching it with a lot of humor.
yeah, well, and sometimes that's what you have to do to kind of reframe and see another way through. So
Yeah.
So we're at the end of our time, Danielle. I have so enjoyed the conversation and getting to know you. So as a woman, here's the signature question we ask at the end of every interview. And as you may know, we're focusing only on women leaders in this season. And so as a woman leading in higher education today, what do you believe or hope is your most important contribution to the future of this sector? And how do you hope your leadership will inspire the next generation of women leaders?
I have heard from so many young women that when I, talk about the fact that it's a struggle and that it's not always perfect, and you don't have to be perfect as a mom or as a professional, and your kids are going to be okay. I had so much guilt as a young professional, that somehow my kids were going to be really damaged because I had chosen to pursue a career. And I see where my kids are at 17 and 21, and they talk about the positive influence of having had a working mom, and the benefits that they've experienced from it. My son, when he was much younger, I was dropping him off at school, and he was asking about, why do some moms work and some don't? And I thought the conversation was a reflection of him being disappointed that I was working. And by the time we got done with the conversation, he said to me, so let me get this straight. I'm supposed to be mad at you because you've been working and you've been contributing to the family's finances, and you've been doing a job that you love, and you've been positively impacting people. And because you missed a couple of like recess duties, I'm supposed to be mad at you? I was like, okay, wow, that reframes that conversation. And that was, he was still 5th or 6th grade. And when I took this job, on the other hand, my daughter, when I took this job, a number of people said to her, as a teenage girl, "You must be so excited. Your mom's got this cool job and she's a young woman for this role. I mean, she's younger than most women in this role, and she's younger than most people in this role, and she's a woman, and this is amazing." And she turned around, she said, "I get why everybody's excited, but my mom has always had leadership roles as long as I've known my mom. This is a normal next step for my mom. And I know what an airhead she can be at home. And so this just seems like normal life to me." She's like, "I get it. I get why people are excited, but this is what women do." It was this really interesting moment where she was like, "This is what moms do. This is normal." And they balance and they juggle and they make mistakes and they lead. And so, uh, as I say that to young women, they're like, you can see them go, "Okay, so I'm not the worst person in the world, and my kids are not going to end up in a terrible situation, and nobody thinks I'm the most unprofessional person on the planet because I'm trying to figure all this out," and just giving people a space to say, "It's okay. We'll get through this." And everybody's sort of feeling it. You're not alone.
Yeah. Well, that is inspiring. And those are great kids. You are no doubt very, very proud of who they have grown into be as young adults. So, Danielle, thank you so much for spending this time with me and for your willingness to share in such a vulnerable way your story and your insights. You're obviously doing great work, and we will keep watching to see what's next at University of Bridgeport.
Thank you so much, Melissa. I really appreciated the time today.
And that's a wrap on today's IngenioUs episode. A very big thank you for tuning in and sharing this time with us. Don't forget to stay in the loop with our Center for Higher Education Leadership and Innovative Practice, the hub that brings this podcast to life. CHELUP is also behind the free monthly webinars on all things cutting edge in higher ed and offers some terrific certificate programs to boot. Have you checked out our YouTube channel yet? It's where the magic of our top-rated episodes from past seasons comes alive with video interviews. Hit that subscribe button so you're always in the know with our latest, greatest content. Like what you heard? Take a moment to rate and review IngeniousU on your podcast platform of choice. Spread the word to your friends and colleagues and invite them to join our IngeniousU circle. Until next time, keep innovating, keep inspiring, and keep making a difference. Stay safe, stay connected, and above all, stay ingenious.